In today's digital world, flat design is fading fast, and 3D websites are leading the next wave of modern web experiences. They're interactive, immersive, and they make your work stand out in ways traditional sites simply can't. What used to be reserved for big studios and game developers is now right at your fingertips. Just a decade ago, websites were static, lifeless blocks of text and images, built with tables, flashing banners, and pixelated graphics. But times have changed. Now, with tools like React, TailwindCSS, and Spline, creating a dynamic 3D experience is not just possible, it's easier than ever. In this beginner-friendly step-by-step tutorial, I'll show you how to build a stunning 3D portfolio from scratch, with clear explanations, smooth animations, and real-world design practices. Whether you're a developer, a designer, or someone just stepping into web creation, this project will take your skills and your portfolio to a whole new dimension. Now, without further ado, let's dive right in and get started. All right, let's get started from absolute scratch, just like we always do. First, go ahead and create a new folder for your project. Name it whatever you like. Once that's done, open your code editor of choice. I'm using VS Code, and simply drag and drop the folder right into the editor. Now, to start writing and running commands, we need to open the terminal. To do that, go to the top menu and click on View, and then Terminal, or you can use keyboard shortcuts. Next, we're going to set up our React application, and for this, we'll be using Vite, which is a super fast and modern way to scaffold React apps. But before we do that, let's open up Chrome and go to tailwindcss.com, because we'll be using Tailwind to style our project. Once you're on the Tailwind website, look at the top left, you'll see a version dropdown. Click on that and select a previous stable version just to make sure everything works smoothly with unexpected changes from the latest version. After that, head over to the search bar and type in Vite. You should see an option that says Install Tailwind CSS with Vite. Go ahead and click on that. Now from this guide, we're going to set up our React app using Vite and install Tailwind step by step. Let's kick things off by creating a new Vite project. To do that, copy the command below and run it in your terminal. But here's the important part. Instead of typing a custom project name like my project, type dot and /. This tells Vite to set everything up inside the current folder rather than creating a new one. Now press Enter. Vite might ask for a project name. Since we're already in the folder, just press the Tab key, then Enter to skip it. Next, you'll be prompted to choose a framework. Use your arrow keys and select React. After that, it'll ask for a variant. We're going with JavaScript, so choose that, not TypeScript. Once selected, Vite will generate your project's structure. But we're not done yet. To install all the required dependencies listed in package.json, run the following command, npm install, hit Enter, and give it a moment to complete the installation. Once that's done, you've got a fully set up React app with everything you need to get started. Let's quickly review what Vite just created. Index.html. This is your root HTML file where React gets injected. It's simple and clean. Package.json manages your project's dependencies, scripts, and other settings. Vite.config.js. This is where Vite's configuration lives. You usually won't need to change much here unless customizing. Node modules contains all the packages installed through npm install. Main.jsx, the entry point of your React app, which mounts your main component into the DOM. App.jsx, your first React component, basically your app's homepage. All right, let's continue and set up Tailwind CSS in our React project. First, we need to install 3 important tools: Tailwind CSS itself, Post CSS, and Auto Prefixer. These work together to process and optimize our CSS. This is a single line that installs all 3 as development dependencies. We'll also initialize Tailwind by running a second command, which creates 2 new files in your project, tailwind.config.js and postcss.config.js. To do this, copy the installation command from the Tailwind CSS website and paste it into your terminal. These are the configuration files Tailwind needs to work properly. Next, let's configure our template paths so Tailwind knows where to look for class names. Head back to the Tailwind website, find the section where they show you the content array, copy that part, then go back to your code editor, open the tailwind.config.js file, delete the default code inside, and paste what you just copied. This setup tells Tailwind to scan all the files inside your source folder and apply its styles based on the utility classes you use. Now that our configuration is ready, we need to include Tailwind's base styles into our project. Again, on the Tailwind site, copy the 3 directive lines that say base, components, and utilities. Then go to your code editor, open the index.css file inside the src folder, and replace everything in that file with the directives you just copied. This step makes sure Tailwind's core styles are loaded into your app. After that, Tailwind usually gives you a small example to test if it's working, just a simple heading with a few classes. Copy that example, head to your app.jsx file inside the src folder, delete everything in there, and paste the example code in its place. This gives us a clean and styled starting point to build on. And that's it for the setup. Now let's see it in action. Go back to your terminal and run the command to start the dev server by typing npm run dev, then hit enter. This will launch your React app in the browser, and you should see Tailwind styles already applied. From here, we're all set to start building with React and styling everything with Tailwind. But to make sure the Tailwind CSS is actually working, let's change some of the styles of our H1. Go ahead and set the text size to 5 extra large and change its color to red. Once you save the file, you should immediately see the changes reflected in your browser. And yes, it works perfectly. Now, here's a cool thing. If you hover over each Tailwind CSS class in your code, you can actually see the raw CSS it represents. But if that's not showing up for you, it likely means you don't have the Tailwind CSS IntelliSense extension installed. To fix that, go to the Extensions panel on the left side of your VS Code, search for Tailwind CSS IntelliSense, and install it. That's going to give you auto-completion, hover previews, and overall a much smoother dev experience. All right, now let's clean things up a bit. We don't need the terminal for now, so go ahead and close it. Then open your app.jsx file, select everything inside it, and delete it. Now type the shortcut RAFCE. This is a handy code snippet that quickly creates a functional React component setup. What RAF stands for is React Arrow Function Component Export. And when you type it, it generates a full functional component structure with export by default. If that didn't work for you, it means you don't have the ES7 Plus React Redux native snippets extension installed. So again, head over to the extensions panel, search for ES7 React snippets, and install it. Once it's installed, try typing rafs again in the app.jsx file, and it should work just fine. One thing though, this snippet usually adds an import line for React at the top, but since we're using React version 17 or newer, we don't actually need to import React manually in every file. So go ahead and remove that import line. Great. Now before we start building out the elements of our project, let's apply some basic global styles to the body of the page. To do that, we're going to move over to the index.css file, and so in this part of our project, we're using something called @layerBase, which is a Tailwind CSS feature that helps us apply global styles. Think of it like setting the base look for our entire website. We're telling Tailwind, hey, before anything else loads, make sure these styles are applied first. Now inside that base layer, we're targeting the body, which is the whole page. Everything you see on the screen lives inside this element. And here's the cool part. Instead of writing regular CSS, we're using Tailwind's @apply to bring in multiple utility classes all at once. So what are we applying? First, we set the background color to black and the text color to white. This gives us a dark theme by default and makes any text pop clearly. Then we make the body relative, which just means we can position things inside it more easily later on if we want something to move or animate. Next, we apply font sans, which switches our font to a clean and modern sans serif style. After that, we set the height to take up the full screen using H-screen, which makes sure the layout stretches from top to bottom of the device. And finally, we use overflow hidden to stop the page from scrolling or showing any unwanted extra content outside the screen. So all of this together creates a clean, full-screen, dark layout that gives our website a modern and professional base to start from. Next, inside the source folder, we actually do not need the app.css file as it is right now. So let's go ahead and remove it. Then, still inside the source folder, let's create a new folder and name it Components. This is where we'll keep all our reusable UI parts. Inside this Components folder, let's create our very first component and name it header.jsx. Once we're inside the header file, type RAFCE to quickly scaffold a basic functional component structure. As always, we don't need to import React manually anymore, so feel free to delete that top line. But here's the thing. Even if you save this file, nothing will show up in your browser just yet, and that's because we haven't imported this header component into our app.jsx file. So let's fix that. Open your app.jsx file, and at the top, we start off by importing the header component. Think of this like grabbing a reusable piece of our website, kind of like a Lego block that we've already built in another file. It's usually the top section of our site where we might put a logo and navigation. Then we define our app function. This is our main component, the big wrapper that holds everything else in our site. Inside the return statement, we're using a div, and we're giving it a bunch of TailwindCSS utility classes to make it look and behave the way we want. Let's break those classes down one by one. We start with container, which centers our content and gives it some nice spacing on the sides by default. Then we add mxauto, which automatically adds equal margin on the left and right to keep the whole layout perfectly centered on the page. Next is px12, which adds padding on the left and right, 12 units worth, so things don't touch the edges of the screen. Then we've got hscreen, which makes this container take up the full height of the screen, from the very top to the very bottom. And finally, we use flex call, which turns this container into a flexible box and arranges all the content inside vertically, like a column. This is perfect for stacking components like putting the header on top and other sections below it. Inside that container, we include the header component, just like that. And now, the top part of our site is showing up in the layout. Great. Now let's move back to our headers file to start creating the actual header for our project. First, inside the return statement, create a header element. Now within this header, let's start by adding a div that's going to contain either your name or your logo. You can customize this however you like. Once that's in place, we'll add a class name to this div to style it using TailwindCSS. We start with LG Text 5XL. This is a responsive class. The LG part means it only applies when the screen size is large or bigger, usually tablets or desktop screens. The Text 5XL part sets the font size to extra large, so when the screen is big, the text becomes nice and huge. Great for making your brand or logo really stand out. Next, we have font extra bold. This makes the text super bold. It's great for emphasis, especially when you're dealing with titles, headers, or in this case, a logo. Then finally, we have text 2XL. This is the default font size when the screen is small, like on a phone. Awesome. Now, just below this branding section, let's create another div. Inside this one, we're going to place 4 anchor tags, and each one of those will hold a social media icon. For the icons, we'll use boxicons.com, which is a really simple and lightweight icon library. So open your browser and go to boxicons.com. Once you're there, click on the usage option in the top right corner of the website. From that page, you'll see an option that says install via npm. Copy that install command, but make sure not to include the $sign at the beginning. Then go back to your code editor, open your terminal, and stop the dev server by pressing Ctrl-C. Now paste the command you just copied into the terminal and press enter. Wait for the installation to complete. Once the installation is done, go ahead and close your terminal. Now to actually use icons from Boxicons, we need to import the style sheet into our header component. So right at the top of the header.jsx file, type this import line: import boxicons/css/boxicons.min.css. That's it. Now we can use any Boxicon we want. Back to the browser, return to the home page of Boxicons, and in the search box, type something like Twitter. Click on the icon you want, then choose the font option, and from there, copy the generated HTML code. Now go back to your header.jsx file and paste that code inside the first anchor tag. This will render the Twitter icon right below your logo. At this point, don't forget to reopen your terminal and restart your development server by typing npm run dev because we had stopped it earlier. Once the server is running and you save your file, head over to the browser and you should now see the Twitter icon below your logo. Follow the exact same steps to add 3 more icons. It's totally up to you which platforms you want to use. You can add LinkedIn, GitHub, Instagram, or whatever fits your personal style. All right, now let's move on to styling our social media icons. We begin with the very first icon by adding a class name. Inside it, we apply text to XL. This simply makes the icon a bit larger, 2 times the base size. Next, we add hover text gray 500. This means when someone hovers over the icon, it changes color to a soft gray. And finally, we add duration 300. That controls how smooth the transition is. So when the hover color changes, it happens over 300 milliseconds, not instantly, which makes it feel smooth and polished. Now that our first icon looks good, we just copy that same class name and paste it onto the other 3 icons, one by one. That way, all the icons share the same styling and look consistent across the top of our site. All right, now it's time to style the header itself. First, give the header element a class name, and let's go through the styles together. We start with Z10. This sets the Z index of the header, making sure it stays on top of other elements in case they overlap. Super useful when working with layered layouts. Then we use Flex. That turns the header into a Flex container, allowing us to easily align its children side by side. We add Justify Between. This pushes the logo to the left and the icons to the right, creating space between them. Next, MB24 adds a margin to the bottom of the header, giving the section below some breathing room. Then we use PT10, that's padding at the top, to push the content down from the top edge of the screen. And finally, Item Center. This vertically centers everything inside the header. That way, the logo and icons line up nicely in the middle, no matter their size. Now, you might notice we need some space between the icons. To do that, we target the div that wraps all the icons. We add flex to it, so the icons are laid out in a row, and then use gap 5, give them some space between each other. That makes everything look balanced and not too cramped. At this point, you might notice something isn't quite right, and that's where debugging comes in. So we open our app.jsx file and spot a small typo. Yep, even a tiny mistake in class names or structure can break your design or cause things to look off. Always double check your spelling and make sure everything is closed properly. All right, now let's keep that momentum going. Next up, we're building the hero section of the site. To keep our code organized, we're going to create this section inside its own React component. So go into your components folder and create a new file called hero.jsx. Once that's done, open it up, type the shortcut RAFCE. This is a React snippet that quickly gives us the structure of a functional component. Now, just remove the line that says import React from React. We don't need that anymore in newer versions of React. Before we start adding content inside the hero component, let's make sure it's properly connected to our main app. So open your app.jsx file. Right below the line where you imported the header, add an import for hero as well, pointing to the right path inside the components folder. Inside that div, right below where we place the header component, add our new hero component so it shows up right after the header on the page. Perfect. Now we're ready to design the actual hero layout. So let's go back to hero.jsx. First, remove the default div and instead create a main element. This will be the main container for the hero section. Inside this main, we add a class name and start applying some TailwindCSS styles. First, we add flex. This makes the main container a flex box, allowing us to align its content easily. Then, we apply flex1. This means the container will take up all available space within its parent, super useful for layouts that stretch full height. Next, we use flex col. This tells Tailwind that the content inside should be stacked vertically. We then add justify between, which spaces out the children vertically, pushing the first to the top and the last to the bottom. And finally, h full makes sure the main section takes up the full height of its parent. Now, inside this main element, we create another div. This one will hold two main parts of our hero section, the text on the left and the 3D model or graphic on the right. So inside that div, we add another class name, and here's what we apply. Flex, so its children are placed side by side. Pi 10, which gives it some vertical padding, 10 units on the top and bottom to give the layout some breathing space. And relative, which sets the position of this container to relative. That means if we later want to absolutely position something inside it, like the 3D model, we can easily do that without affecting the whole page. Now, inside this div, create another div. This div will contain all of the elements of the introducing section. Let's give it a class name and apply the flex and flex col styles. What this does is it sets up a vertical layout for the content inside, which is exactly what we want to keep things clean and stacked nicely for a modern hero section. To create the title for our introducing section, we'll start with another wrapper div, and inside that, we'll add one more nested div. This nested div is where we're going to drop in an icon to make the title visually pop. Now, for the icon, we're using boxicons. These are lightweight and easy to add. First, let's bring them into our component, just like we did in the header. So open up your header.jsx file, copy the boxicons import from the top, and paste it into the top of your hero.jsx file. Once that's done, go to boxicons.com in your browser. In the search bar, type in star, pick the one you like. Make sure to switch to the font tab, not SVG, then copy the code they give you. It's going to look like an ID tag with some class names. Now head back to your editor and paste that inside the innermost div we created earlier. If you save the file and check your website, the icon should now be visible. Now, inside this icon element, we're going to type some text. Let's add developer portfolio to make it clear what this section is about. This combo of icon plus title gives our section some identity. Now let's add styles for the container of the icon. For that, we're going to extract the styles into the index.css file. This makes our JSX code cleaner and easier to read, and it also gives us the ability to reuse that style in other parts of our website later on. So to start, open up your index.css file, and inside it we'll use Tailwind's @layer components directive. This is where we can define our custom class. We'll name the class introducing-container. Inside this class, we'll add some CSS that creates a visually interesting background and positions the element correctly. We set the position to absolute and use inset0 to make sure it stretches across the full size of its parent. We add a z-index of -1 to send it behind other content. Then we round the corners with a border radius of 20 pixels. And finally, we give it a beautiful gradient background that flows through multiple colors diagonally. This gives it a cool and modern look. Now that we've defined that style, we can use it on any element in our project just by adding introducing container to the class name. So let's copy that class name, head over to the hero.jsx file, and paste it into the class name of the div that wraps our icon. Now, when you save the file and look at the site, you should see that the background and positioning styles are now applied to that container. But we're not done just yet. We want to refine it further with a few utility classes directly inside the JSX. So in addition to introducing container, we'll add some Tailwind classes. First, we set the width to 230 pixels by using WTPX. On medium screens and above, we want it a little bigger. The height is set to 33 pixels using H33px. Then, to center the icon inside the box, we make it a flex container with flex, align the items in the center using items center, and center them horizontally with justify center. Finally, we add a little space below the box by applying MB5, which stands for margin bottom 1.5 rem. That's it. Let's move on. Next, below this element, let's create another div. This div is going to contain some text that describes your work, your experience, or really anything you want, so feel free to customize this later. Now, inside that div, we'll start by adding an H1 element. In this example, we'll use the text, providing the best project experience. It's a strong, confident statement, and it works great for a portfolio. Let's add a class name to this H1 to style it using Tailwind CSS. First, we want the font size to be responsive. That means it should adjust based on the screen size. On large screens, we want it to be quite bold and eye-catching, so we use LG Text 5XL. On small screens, we reduce that a little with SM Text 4XL. And for the base size, the smallest screens, we set it to Text 2XL. This ensures it looks good on all devices. Next, we want to make the font extra bold to help it stand out, so we add Font Extra Bold. And finally, we give it a little space underneath by applying MB5, which stands for Margin Bottom 1.25 rem. That wraps up the basic responsive text styling. Now we want to take this to the next level by giving the text a beautiful gradient color. But instead of putting all those styles inside the JSX, let's keep things clean and reusable by adding this style to our global style sheet. So let's open the index.css file, scroll down, and add a new utility class using layer utilities. We'll define a class called BG gradient radial, and inside it we use background image with a radial gradient. The gradient will start from the center and spread out in a circular shape. We'll place the center of the gradient at 50% horizontally and 70% vertically, and then we use var tw gradient stops. This is how Tailwind dynamically injects the colors you choose using utility classes like from and to. Once that's done, save the file and go back to the hero.jsx component. Now we can use the BG gradient radial class on our H1 element. Just add it right into the class name. In addition to that, we'll apply a few more Tailwind utilities to complete the effect. We'll use from violet 400 to start the gradient with a soft violet color, and to white to fade it into white. To make the gradient appear inside the text, not behind it, we use bg-clip text, which clips the background to just the text area. And finally, we use text transparent, which makes the actual text color invisible so the gradient can show through. That's it for our H1. Now we've got a beautifully styled responsive headline with a custom radial gradient effect applied directly to the text. Let's move on to the next element. Right below the H1, we're going to create a paragraph element. This will be a short explanation about yourself, something like what you do, your passion for development, or your goals. Keep it simple and clear, especially since this is the first thing people will read. Once you've added your text, go ahead and give this paragraph a class name. To make sure it doesn't stretch too wide, we'll set its maximum width to 400 pixels. This keeps the paragraph nicely contained and easier to read, especially on larger screens. Next, we're going to target the main div that holds both the H1 and the paragraph. This is the container for the text content of your hero section. Let's give this div a class name and apply a few important styles to it. We'll start with LG max-u500px so that on large screens, the container never goes wider than 500 pixels. Then for smaller screens, we use SM max to make it a bit narrower and max W hat between 50 peak for the base size to make sure it fits on mobile. This makes the layout responsive and keeps everything neat. We also add leading relaxed to improve the spacing between lines of text, which really helps with readability. Now let's make a small change to the element that says Developer Portfolio. We're going to add the relative class to it. Once that's done, go ahead and save your file. The final element we're going to add in this part is a call to action button, something users can click to contact you. So let's create a new div and give it a class name with MT5 to add some spacing above it. Inside this div, we'll create an anchor tag that will eventually link to your contact section or open an email. Inside this anchor tag, we'll add an icon from boxcons.com. This time, search for a send icon. Once you find one you like, copy the code just like we did before and paste it inside the anchor tag. Right next to the icon, add the text, "Contact me." Now let's style this anchor tag. Start by giving it a class name and apply the following Tailwind styles. First, we'll set its width to 208 pixels and height to 33 pixels using W208px and H33px. Then we use inline flex so the text and icon are aligned in a single row. We'll center everything using item center and justify center. Next, we'll add a subtle border using border gray 400 and round the corners with rounded full. To give the text a little personality, we apply text sem for a smaller font size and tracking wider to space out the letters a bit. Now we want to add a box shadow that appears when the user hovers over the button. To keep things clean and consistent, let's define this style inside our index.css file. Go ahead and open that file, scroll down to the @layer components section, and below the other styles, let's create a new class called .contact button. Inside this class, we'll set a soft inner shadow using inset to give it a subtle 3D look. We'll also add transition duration 0.3s for a smooth effect when hovering. Then we define the hover state using .contact button hover, and here we change the box shadow which creates a nice glowing effect from the inside when the button is hovered. Now, copy the contact button class and go back to the hero.jsx file. Add this class to your anchor tag alongside the other Tailwind styles. Save your file, and now when you hover over the contact button, you'll see this smooth and professional-looking shadow effect kick in. Nice work. Now we have a fully styled text section and a call to action button that stands out. In the next step, we'll integrate a 3D model using Spline. It's a simple and fun process, so don't worry. First, open your terminal and stop the program from running by pressing Ctrl and C. This ends the development server so we can install new tools without interference. Next, we're going to run a command to install the Spline package that lets us embed 3D models into our React app. Type out npm install @splinetool/react-spline. This command grabs the React integration from Spline's official tools and adds it to your project's dependencies. Once that installation is complete, let's start our project back up. Run npm run dev, and this will launch your development server again and open the project in your browser so we can see live updates as we work. Now let's head over to the hero.jsx file. This is where we're building our hero section, and we want to embed the 3D element here. Scroll to the top of the file and add an import for the Spline component. Type import Spline from @splinetool/react-spline. This line gives us access to the special Spline/component that we'll use to embed our 3D scene. Now, inside the main layout of our hero component, scroll down below all of our other content, right after the text and the call to action button, and let's create a new div. This new div will be the container for our 3D model, so it's where the visual interaction starts to happen. Now here's where the fun begins. Open your browser and go to Spline's website. If you don't have an account already, take a minute to sign up. It's free. For this tutorial, I've already created a 3D model you can use, and I've linked it in the video's description. Click on that link and you should see a live preview of the model. At the top of the page, look for a button that says Duplicate File. Click on it and wait for the scene to load into your own workspace. This makes a copy of the model so you can customize it however you like. Now let's say you want to personalize this model with your own image. Look on the left side, this is the object hierarchy or dashboard. Find the group container, and before editing, make sure it's unlocked. Once it's open, look for the second image item inside. Select it, then move your eyes over to the right-hand panel. Under the Material section, you'll see the image settings. Click on that, then use the Upload option right below to upload your own picture from your computer. Once that's done, let's quickly review the model. Everything should look good. If it does, it's time to export it and bring it into our React project. At the top of the Spline editor, click on Export, and then select Play Settings. This is where you can tweak how the 3D model behaves on your website. Now, just a heads up, if you want to remove the Spline watermark, you'll need to upgrade to the premium version. But no worries, we're sticking to the free plan and it still gives us a lot of flexibility. Within these play settings, make sure to hide the background and disable options like orbit, pan, and zoom unless you specifically want those effects on your site. Match the settings to what you see in this tutorial and you'll be good to go. Now scroll to the bottom and click on Update Public URL. This makes your model accessible via a direct link. Then go back to the Export tab and from the left sidebar, choose Code Export. Wait a few seconds while Spline generates the code for you. Once the code is ready, you'll see a Spline React component already set up for you. Simply copy that JSX snippet using Ctrl-C, then switch back to your code editor and paste that inside the div you created earlier in the hero.jsx file. At this point, save your changes, and just like that, you'll see your 3D model appear live on your website. Now, you might notice that the model looks a bit off in terms of positioning. Maybe it's too big or overlapping content. That's totally expected. We're going to fix this in the next step by adding some Tailwind CSS styles to properly size and position the 3D canvas. Let's start by adding a class name to this div element and apply the following styles. We begin with LGW 70%. This means on large screens, the width of this div will take up 70% of the screen. Next is LGHTI 70 cent, same idea, but for the height. So it keeps the 3D model big and noticeable on desktops. Now, NYZ10, this pushes the element behind all other elements. That way our text or buttons stay clickable. Then we add fixed. This locks the 3D model in place, so even if we scroll, it stays put. Now, LG top 12%, this moves it down 12% from the top on large screens. Then MD right Mangana 15%, that's pushing the model a little off screen to the right on medium screens for some creative spacing. Next, MD top 20%, same idea. On medium screens, we push it 20% down from the top. We also set MDH a 50% height on medium devices so it's not too big. Now H 35%, that's the base height for smaller screens. Then top 10% for small screens, we place it 10% down from the top. And finally right 14%, 14% from the right edge on small screens. So now the 3D model is positioned responsively based on screen size. It looks balanced and behaves nicely across devices. Now we need to push the introducing section of our hero to the bottom of the page. To do that, we target the div that contains all the elements, like our title, paragraph, and contact button, and give it the following styles. We start with absolute. This lets us move the whole introducing block freely over the screen. Then we apply MD gap 10. This adds space between the inner elements, only when we hit medium screen sizes. Next is LG top 12. We move it down a bit on large screens. LG left 4, that's just nudging it slightly to the right on large displays. Now M top 36, for medium screens, we place it much lower. And M left 1, just a slight horizontal adjustment on medium viewports. Then top 72, for small screens, this really pushes it down so it sits well with the rest of the layout. Finally, left 12, that places it comfortably away from the left edge. Let's check the result in the browser. Looks good. Everything sits nicely, the layout adapts beautifully to different screen sizes, and we're one step closer to having a clean, modern hero section. Great work so far. Now in our next step, we will add a huge text to the bottom of our design. So inside the main element, right below all the other elements, let's create a new div. This will act as the container for a large H1 element. The text we're going to display is simple and bold. It says Web Developer. Let's style it step by step. First, we give the div a class name and set margin top to auto. This will push the text down to the bottom of the main element. Now for the H1 element itself, let's apply a class name and break it down together. We start with LG Text 9XL, which makes the text absolutely massive on large screens. It creates a strong visual impact. Then MD Text 8XL, so on medium screens, it's still big, but a little smaller for better layout control. Next is Text 3XL. This is the base size applied on small screens so it doesn't overwhelm the layout. We also use font extra bold to make the text very thick and strong. That bold presence is key for this section. Then we add MB8. That's margin bottom, just to add some breathing room below the text on most screens. Next is tracking wider, which slightly increases the spacing between the letters, making it look more modern and stylish. We center it using text center because this kind of bold headline should usually be right in the middle for maximum effect. Now for the cool part, we make the text gradient. First, we add BG gradient radial, which is the radial gradient class we defined earlier in our index.css. Then we apply from white and to gray 600. These define the start and end colors of our gradient. To make the gradient appear inside the text, we add bg-clip text. This clips the background into the shape of the letters. And finally, text transparent makes the actual text invisible, so only the gradient behind it shows. That's what creates the awesome gradient text effect. One last touch, we add a responsive utility media max width dpx mb-2. This reduces the margin bottom on extra small devices so everything fits better. We also need to fix the position of the introducing section for the super small devices. So just copy this style. We're going to update it with some extra small screen support. Now scroll up to the main div element that contains all the elements of the introducing section. And here, let's say that we want on extra small devices to slightly adjust the position so that it fits better on tiny screens. So we'll update the top and left values specifically for those devices. And for the left, we'll set it to left 8. These changes will only apply when the screen is extra small, like on older phones or narrow devices. This gives our layout a little breathing room and ensures everything fits without overlapping or being cut off. And that's it. Just those 2 tweaks, and now our design is fully responsive across all different screen sizes, from large desktops to the smallest mobile phones. The next step is to add a background image to our website, something clean to give more personality to the whole layout without taking away from the content. Let's dive into that next. I have prepared an image for this project that you can download from the GitHub repository. The link is down below in the description box of the video. Once you're there, please give it a star to support the project, and then click on the Images folder. Inside that, you'll see a file named background.png. Click on it, and from the top right, choose the download option to grab the file. Now head back to your code editor, open up the Assets folder in your project structure, and drag and drop the downloaded image right into it. Great, now the image is inside our project. Next, inside the hero.jsx file, we want to actually display this image. So go into the main element right below all the other elements, and let's create an img element. For the src, we'll just link the image path that we placed in the assets folder. Once we save it, we should be able to see the image appear on our website. But right now, it's just sitting there, so we need to style it properly. Let's give it a class name and apply a few Tailwind utility classes. We start with absolute to take it out of the normal flow of the page. We then set MyZ10 to send it behind all the other elements. Next, we apply BG cover so the image covers the entire background area. For sizing, we use MinW full and MinH screen to stretch it full width and full height. Then top 0 and left 0 to anchor it to the top left of the screen. Now, if we check our layout, there's one problem. Our 3D model is no longer visible. It's being pushed under the background image because of the layering order. So to fix that, we'll simply adjust the Z index of the background image to an even lower value. Now the image stays at the very back and the 3D model appears right on top of it as it should. And that's it. Everything is looking great now. The last thing we're going to do in this step is add a reload animation to our project. Because right now, if you refresh the page, nothing animates in. It feels a little static. So we're going to use a really cool and lightweight library called AOS, which stands for Animate on Scroll. The process is really simple, and I'll walk you through every part of it. So open your browser and search for AOS, which stands for Animate on Scroll. Click on the official website. Right away, you'll see a bunch of cool animation examples you can use. Fade-ins, slide-ins, zoom effects, and all of them can be applied to your own project with just a few lines of code. But before we can use any of these, we need to install the AOS library into our project. To do that, head up to the top right corner of the AOS website and click on the GitHub icon. That will take you to the official AOS GitHub repository. Once you're there, scroll down the page a bit until you see a section titled Using Package Manager. Under this, you'll find the install command. Just copy that line of code. Now switch back to your code editor, open up the terminal, and first stop the project from running by pressing Ctrl-C on your keyboard. Now paste the command you copied from GitHub into the terminal and hit Enter. This will install AOS into your project. Once the installation is done, go ahead and close the terminal. Back on the AOS GitHub page, you'll also see two important import lines. The first one brings in the actual AOS JavaScript functionality. The second one imports the default AOS styles. Copy both of these lines. Now in your code editor, open the app.jsx file and paste those imports right at the top of the file. Alongside that, we also need to bring in React's useEffect hook because we're going to initialize the AOS animations when the app loads. So add import React useEffect from React at the top as well. Then scroll down to where your app function begins, right inside the const app, and just above the return statement, let's set up our useEffect. This is where we initialize AOS. Inside the useEffect, we're going to call aos.init and we'll pass it a config object. We'll set duration to 1500 milliseconds to make the animation smooth and slow, and once to true, so the animation happens only the first time an element comes into view. And that's it. Everything is now set up for us to start adding animations to our components using the AOS library. So navigate back to the AOS website and scroll down until you see a section titled Different Settings Example. From here, we've got a list of animations we can use right away without writing any extra code. Let's start with this one called Fade Down. Just copy the sample code that's inside the div. It includes the animation type as a data AOS attribute. Now head back to your code editor and open the header.jsx component file. Inside the main header element, that's the outermost div of your header, go ahead and paste the copied data AOS attribute. Let's check the result in the browser. But oh wait, we forgot. We stopped the program earlier during the AOS installation. So open your terminal and run the command npm run dev to start the project again in live mode. Now refresh the page and you'll see it. The header fades down beautifully when the page loads. Super clean and smooth. All right, let's add another animation. Go back to the AOS site and this time select Fade Right. Same thing. Copy the example code from the site, then switch back to your code editor. This time, open the hero.jsx file. We want to apply this animation to our introducing section. That's the div that holds all the text and elements at the top of our hero section. Paste the data-aos equals fade right into that div and make sure the code is indented nicely. Now go ahead and refresh the page. Our introducing section now fades in from the right when the user visits the page. And now for our final animation. Back to the AOS website, and let's pick something a little more dramatic. Choose the fade zoom in animation. Same process, copy the code, then back to the code editor again. Open the part of your hero.jsx where the 3D model lives. That's the div that wraps the spline slash component. We're going to paste the data AOS attribute right into that div and make sure everything is properly indented. Time for the final test. Refresh your browser and you'll now see the 3D model zooms in while fading in, adding a really polished and modern touch to the whole experience. And that's it. Congratulations on completing this small but creative project. We learned how to set up AOS for animations, added beautiful visual movement to our header, hero content, and 3D model, and made everything feel more dynamic. If you run into any problems or if anything I explained wasn't clear, feel free to drop a comment below and I'll be happy to help. I'll see you very soon with another exciting project. Until then, take care and keep coding.